Yeah. Because I think this election poster says it really well. So for you poor people that don't know any Chinese, I'll tell you up here it says Chen Xia Wei Gong. And it comes from a very old, wise Chinese man by the name of Confucius. And it means that the world belongs to everybody. This is the Chinese way of expressing the general welfare principle. And then if you look further down, you'll see the China in the background, and you'll see Lincoln, and you'll see Sun Yat-sen. And underneath, you'll have in English, of the people, by the people, and for the people. And then under Sun Yat-sen's picture, the same thing in Chinese. And this was a stamp that was printed in 1942 to help with the war effort. But I also think as an image, it really characterizes what has been discussed already today and what we need to do in the immediate future ahead. And you all know, I've heard it both from Chinese people and from Americans, including Americans that work within the LaRouche. I mean, the Chinese, they take our jobs, they do this and that, and all kinds of, and then you have one propaganda wave after the other against China. And they should do something about their currency and so on. And you have, from the Chinese, they will also say, they will go for the propaganda you have right now that U.S. is in an empire, U.S. is going out bombing different countries and so on. And I think it's really important because all this propaganda and historical situation being created is being done by the British Empire. It is profiles to get people to be in opposition to each other. So therefore, what I would like to do, I'm not going to give a presentation on Sun Yat-sen, but I'll give a really brief outline what created him, and in that way give an idea that we are natural allies. China and the United States are natural allies. Russia and the United States are natural allies, but I'm going to concentrate on China and the United States. And I'll give the example through Sun Yat-sen, because what created this man, he decided when he was 19 years old that the Emperor of China had to be overthrown. And if you think about it, this is like hundreds and hundreds of years of empire in China. And when he had taken the decision that this needed to be done, he organized for it. In the next 8 years, he recruited 3 other guys to overthrow the emperor. And this is, China is a huge nation. And at that time, you had all these warlords spread out, and people were very poor. And how was this going? You had foreign powers that was controlling different parts of China. So how did that young man, 19-year-old, he was a medical student, he decided it should happen, and he stuck with it. Then he fought for 16 years, he was exiled. He fought, he traveled the world around 6 times. He recruited support groups all over the world, in Europe, in the United States, in Canada, for the Chinese Revolution. He raised money. He created secretly schools were set up in the United States, in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, and elsewhere to train officers, Chinese officers. He recruited young Chinese men in the Chinatowns, told them to cut off the queue. That was a symbol of bowing down to the emperor. And they were trained to become officers. They were smuggled back. 2,100 young Chinese men trained on American soil were smuggled back via different routes back to China. And it's very undoubtful that without those trained officers that the revolution could have been won. He did that. He did everything. He support, fundraising, training the officers, educating people why this was necessary. And after 10 uprisings in China, you had the success that the revolution was won. But here you have a country which has been really suppressed for many, many decades. And the history is too long to go through. And now the next step he decides to take, he wants to develop China. So he fights in order for China not to get into the First World War. This is what Summer Shields read up about the British, how they were trying to manipulate the world and manipulate China into a First World War. He runs around China giving one lecture after the other in detail how China must be built up. That is, how is China going to gain its sovereignty of the people and by the people, how it's going to be built up, also in detail, how are we going to have an election process, how are the systems going to function regarding how the country is going to be governed. And the most important on these three principles, San Ming Ju Yi, the three principles of the people, which Sun Yat-sen says all the time, I got them from Lincoln. The most important was for him the general welfare, the Chen Sha Wei Gong, Ming Sheng, that we have to lift up, we have to give people a proper living standard, because if we are doing that, we will make China strong, it will be good for the world. And this is the first principle, is the most important principle, is the general welfare. And he never gave up, he did everything, and he had an intent. And he would refer again and again to the United States of America. But he was not just a product of the United States of America. And I'll tell you how he was, where he came from, because I think it gives a good example of how we are natural allies today. Sun Yat-sen came from the most beautiful thinking that you have in China, in Chinese history and philosophy. And he based himself upon these ideas his entire life. That is the ideas of Confucius and Mencius. And this will be a long lecture if I was going to go through all of Confucius and Mencius and the most important things. But let me give you some key pointers that, first of all, from the highest, that Confucius will tell you how the universe is lawful ordered, how it changes unceasingly. It never stops changing, and it's always in a harmonic order. That the sun and the moon know which pathways they should take, and they never take the wrong turn, they never go the wrong way. That man is part of that universe, and that man has a function in that universe. Confucius say, and think about what the highest, most beautiful ideas you know from the West, those of you here that are not Chinese. Confucius say that each one of us are born with certain innate qualities. Of these are love, justice, and love of justice, knowledge, and love of knowledge. And I'll stick with those. He says of these, there's more, but I'll stick with these for a reason. He says of these, love is the most important. If you have no love, none of the other qualities matter. Very similar to what St. Paul will say, that if you have no love, nothing else matters. You will just be like an empty shell. And Confucius further will describe how it is your duty as a human being, it is your duty to develop all the capabilities you have been born with. And if you don't do that, then you are playing thief with yourself. And the only way you can develop these capabilities is that you have to be completely sincere. You have to be truthful. You have to develop those qualities according to a principle called Cheng, which means without deceit. And when you do that, Confucius say, if you develop all your capabilities that you've been born with, then you can, together with heaven and earth, you can participate in the developing process. Sun Yat-sen would describe himself throughout his life. He would write sayings from Confucius. He would write Chen Sha Wei Gong on his calligraphy. And he would describe that China has a specimen of political philosophy so systematic and so clear that nothing has been discovered or spoken by foreign statesmen to equal it. It is found in the great learning. That's from Confucius. Search into the nature of things. Extend the boundaries of knowledge. Make the purpose sincere. Regulate the mind. Cultivate personal virtue. Rule the family. Govern the state. Pacify the world. And Sun Yat, there was a quote from Confucius, and Sun Yat-sen continues saying, "This calls upon a man to develop from within outward, to begin with his inner nature and not cease until the world is at peace. Such a deep, all-embracing notion is not found in or spoken by any foreign political philosopher. It is the nugget of wisdom peculiar to China's philosophy of state and worthy to be preserved." So he would live Confucius. I mean, when he was 13 years old and for the first time went to the West, he had already studied all the classics. And then he encountered the United States of Abraham Lincoln and the founding fathers in Hawaii. And how did that function? Well, I'll make a little jump, and I will give you a quote. When you go now next time to Washington, D.C., go into the monument, and there you will find a statement in Chinese. It is a plaque that was taken from China in 1853, and brought into the United States, and it's put into the monument in Washington, D.C. And it's a long quote. I'm only going to quote 2 lines. And they go, "Of all the famous Westerners of ancient and modern times, can Washington be placed in any position but first? That is, Washington is the greatest." This was written by a very powerful man in China called Xu Jiyu. And he was a governor of a large southern province, Fujian province. And why would he write about Washington? And why would a plaque be taken all the way from China in 1853 and put into the monument for Washington? Well, that came from the following. In 1812, the year where the British attacked the United States again, the year where Napoleon was sent in by the empire to attack Russia. In that year, in 1812, a very specific organization was formed called the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions. This was formed by people like John Quincy Adams, one of the great founding fathers, John Jay, who was part of writing in the New Federalist Papers, and many others of that caliber. When they formed this board of missionaries, what was their idea? The idea was for Americans to not only cross all of the United States, but also cross the Pacific, to go to Asia, to all different nations in Asia, Japan, Thailand, China, and so forth. Go to Asia and spread the word to do good. It was not necessarily to convert a number of people to Christianity. The number one was to spread the most beautiful ideas upon which the United States was founded, way back from the ideas of the Compact of the Mayflower in 1620. So they went, and you had one guy called Abel. He met this Governor Xu of Fujian province, and Xu was really into learning, because China had been gobbled up, humiliated with the Opium Wars and so forth, and they were very interested to figure out new ideas. So the missionaries from the United States, created by these key founding fathers in the United States, they educated a grouping inside China. And it was out of that this plague came. This governor from Fujian, he wrote a history book. And it's from this history book that this quote on Washington is taken. And he writes in this history book, the best of all the countries are the United States. The United States has no counts and no kings. And he refers in a long, long quotes concerning how Washington even is better than the greatest heroes of China. This is then being picked up by other people in China, other leading people in China. That it's a long story that I'm not going to, but you have a whole, in all the attacks on China at that time by the foreign powers in that century, you had these ideas coming from the United States, from the very best of the United States. And that's where Sun Yat-sen came out of. He went to a school in Hawaii when he came there that was founded by these missionaries. When he went over back to China, to Hong Kong and Guangzhou, he was baptized by one of those missionaries. The medical school he went to was built by those missionaries. So he would take the very best of the ideas concerning man and the general welfare from Confucius and fuse it with the very best from the United States, the very best that had been brought over from Europe. So I will end now with a surprise and a nice little gift. And I would ask people to go down and look at the exhibition later on when you have time. And I can also announce that right now our production crew in Percival are producing a video on this history of Sun Yat-sen, because he and Lincoln that you see here really embodies we have to look for the real China and the real United States. The United States is not Obama. The United States is not the destruction we see right now. The United States we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and have inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The United States is a country that the founding principle is that in the preamble to the Constitution, the two most important things, I think, is the general welfare and for posterity. That is the very best what China represents. That's what the very best, if you look at the key people in Russia's history and in other countries' history. And it's around those highest ideas about man that we should unite. And one thing that Confucius said, if you violate the mandate of heaven, the civilization will go. If we decide to follow the mandate of heaven, what we are going to do is to collaborate with China and Russia and other nations to colonize the galaxy. So now I come to the surprise, or the gift, which was made by Ali and Mark here in the last days with a lot of work, and which is going to be used in our video on Sun Yat-sen. And that is, you're going to see this Chinaman, Sun Yat-sen, making a program that is a very American program. And this is showing you, he made it in 1919, and it's showing you the way to go today for the whole world. And it's very fitting for our afternoon panel. So I would now ask Mark to put on this little video that was just produced, which shows you in detail what Sun Yat-sen proposed in 1919.
Nearly a decade following the 1911 revolution, Sun Yat-sen realized that no true freedom from imperialism would occur until China and its people were fully developed. In his 1921 The International Development of China, Dr. Sun lays out a comprehensive program for the transformation of the Chinese territory and the harnessing of its vast resource and agro-industrial potential through the building of over 100,000 miles of rail, over 1 million miles of roads, the construction of new deep-water ports, the improvement of old and construction of new canals, greatly needed water development projects, the construction of telegraph lines, new modern cities, large-scale iron, steel, and cement plants, and, most importantly, the colonization and harnessing of new frontiers in Mongolia, Manchuria, Xinjiang, Kokonur, and Tibet. The keystone of Dr. Sun's program begins with the construction of the three major ports, the Great Northern Port near the city of Beijing, the Great Southern Port in Guangzhou, and the Great Eastern Port near the city of Shanghai. These are the pillars on which the rest of the rail system relies.
To begin, let's start with the Great Northern Port, a newly created deep water port in the heart of Bohai Bay and the first northern port which would remain ice-free in the wintertime. From here, the entirety of the northern China rail system would branch out, connecting China's densely populated coastline to the virgin, uninhabited regions of western Mongolia, the frontier. As our port is a starting point to the sea, so the first trunk line will follow the Luan Valley to Dola Nor, the gateway to the vast Mongolian prairie. From Dola Nor, rail makes its way to the frontier, traveling over 2,000 miles, skirting the Great Gobi Desert to Uramochi, branching westward into the Tarim Basin and north to the frontier city of Ili, where China's rail system will connect with the rest of the Eurasian land bridge system, connecting Berlin to Baghdad to Beijing and Moscow to Shanghai, eliminating dependence on British sea dominance once and for all.
From here, let's go to the Great Eastern Port, located in the Hanqiao Bay just south of Chapu near the city of Shanghai. Though rail lines in this area will follow the same principles as those of the northern rail system, extending from the Shanghai port through China's terrain all the way to the frontier connecting with the Siberian lines, the major aspect taken up here will be that of China's water system. The Yangtze River, the longest river in all of China, the backbone of China's economy for thousands of years, originates in the Great Tibetan Plateau and empties into the Hanqiao Bay near Shanghai, greening several thousand miles of China's most densely populated arable land in the process. The banks of the Yangtze River itself will be expanded with the construction of a new canal on either side. A dam will be constructed near three gorges to regulate the flow of the upper and lower Yangtze River and to halt the devastating flooding that has been China's sorrow for thousands of years. The development of China's Grand Canal, along with the construction of several new river and seaports, new canals, and water systems, will facilitate a network of navigable waterways throughout central China.
The last pillar of Dr. Sun's development program begins at the great southern port of Canton, whose location at the junction of three major navigable rivers makes it the gateway to over 3,000 square miles of the most fertile, productive soil in all of China. Despite its strategic significance, Canton's restoration as one of China's main industrial centers and its transformation into a seaport had been hindered in every possible way by the British Empire, who at the time controlled Hong Kong and wanted no competition to their dominance of maritime trade. The development of the southern region of China, sprouting from the Great Southern Port, would be in complete opposition to Britain's imperial system. Trunk lines of rail would be the trailblazers of development, opening up the region's vast iron, coal, timber, agriculture, and mineral resources, ready to be harnessed by the creativity and will of man. Such a development corridor is the foundation for the growth of new, modern cities, connected through a network of intertwined rail and communication systems, built and serviced through the development of coal and ironworks for greater energy and industrial production, and fed through the creation of new agricultural lands, utilizing the most advanced machinery and farm practices. But most importantly, this internal development of China will not only create the conditions where more people can inhabit the land at a greater standard of living, it will open up China's greatest resource: the development of free, thinking, creative citizens. And that is the only internal improvement that can truly wipe out imperialism once and for all.